Hello everyone, Pulse here with another episode of Delving Deep ESO. Now in this episode I wanted to talk a little bit about the phasing mechanisms that will be at work in ESO and some of the positives and of course some of the negative things that come along with the phasing implementations in the upcoming MMO. But to start, let me briefly explain what I mean by phasing. What in the hell does phasing even mean? Well, basically, phasing is the idea that each player essentially has their own personal server, as it were. It's not quite that way, but essentially what happens is in the world, each player will be inhabiting the same place, have the same story, the same content and visuals, what have you, but those things can actually differ depending on certain parameters met by the player, such as completing a certain quest chain or moving the story along to a certain point, making certain choices within that story, or even being removed from the overworld area entirely for, say, like a single player only endeavor, such as going to Cold Harbor in ESO. Now, phasing as a technique and as a technology can do some pretty fascinating and amazing things that can definitely add to the experience. But with every positive thing also comes a risk or an offsetting negative. So let's dig into some of that and how it pertains to ESO. So to start, let's go into what I think is a major positive for the way phasing is done in ESO, and that is Elder Scrolls Online definitely provides that sense of isolationism familiar to anyone that has experienced a prior test title, as a mechanism to make the story feel really solo-oriented, make it feel like it's definitively a solo experience. It definitely works brilliantly. It makes you feel like you are the one hero on a journey, your story is your own, and it definitely feels like prior test experiences. It really, really does. Now, I don't know if this is the main reason for what I would call excessive use of phasing in ESO, but I'll give Zenimax the benefit on this one because there is a rational reason to implement it this way. I mean, they are definitely targeting two separate audiences here by melding Elder Scrolls with MMO, so maybe they intended for the story to be a very solo-driven experience. And that brings me on to something that normally I would rant about. If it wasn't for this being an Elder Scrolls game and an MMO, if it was just a typical MMO, I would be ranting pretty hard by that decision. Why would I be ranting by that? Well, to be honest, it's because it completely messes with the multiplayer experiences in the overworld. So outside of dungeons and things like that, the overworld, the main playable space, you cannot do multiplayer in any real sense, to be honest. There's a couple reasons that this is such a big deal, and it's mostly just large oversights, honestly. The first is that even when grouped, you cannot phase into another person's lair or personal phase outside of cities. And there should be video in the background where you have seen, or you will see shortly, where me and my girlfriend were testing out the phasing stuff in the game. And basically a bunch of nonsense happens. You can't see her on the screen. There's just an arrow. I phase into her in the city and I go and find her. We exit the city and she has a quest kind of like right outside the door. And while on her screen, she's completing the quest just fine. She's having a ball of a time. I'm just seeing her character kind of bug out all over the place, standing still, and then 1 second kind of glitching out and teleporting away. There's like one bit where her back like looks like it's breaking in two. And while it was very funny at the time, it's also very irritating and really annoying to know that you can't quest with friends in Elder Scrolls Online, not in any traditional sense. The only real way that you'll be able to do something like this is if you go out of your way to coordinate heavily, like way more than you'd ever have to do playing any other multiplayer game ever. You would have to coordinate that on this night at this time, we're going to log in and do these quests in this exact order. We have to stand by each other at all times, or we risk splitting ourselves into different phases, and that's a real issue. And it's honestly just the phasing is done in an over-the-top kind of fashion, and to me it's counterproductive, even if they were wanting to make the story and the quest experience be more of an Elder Scrolls oriented thing, mainly because as far as I'm concerned, the biggest draw to the Elder Scrolls fans is not that it's a single player game, but rather that it's a co-op or multiplayer kind of Elder Scrolls experience, which is what people wanted, right? They wanted a Skyrim co-op, but granted, that's not something we're going to get, and that was honestly not something anyone should have expected looking at this game. But even still, the excessive phasing in the way that it's done, it just makes it seem like they didn't really think that decision through. But again, I'll kind of give them the benefit. Maybe this is a real deliberate thing, because it is done in such a fashion that I can't imagine somebody there wouldn't have spoken up, honestly. I really can't do that. The problem is that this mass overuse of phasing, even if done deliberately, is just, I will say, a poor decision. It really is. It brings up one kind of massive concern, which is kind of a part of a bigger problem, honestly. What this kind of was spurred by some conversation about roleplay and running a guild and what have you in the upcoming MMO. And me and some guys were getting into some conversations about how in the world we're going to hold roleplay-oriented in-game guild meetings. Because I like to roleplay every now and then when I'm in an MMO. And we couldn't find a way to do it unless everyone was on the exact same phase. So the only times we could think that it would work is if you're in the city, you can guarantee everyone in your guild can meet up, which it doesn't seem you'll be able to, because even when the only time you can do it in cities even is if you're grouped up. So if you have guildmates beyond, say, 4 or 5 people or what have you, you won't be able to necessarily coordinate 2 groups to meet in a city. So it's still very difficult. And then obviously we have maybe in the overworld, if you can guarantee everyone is on the same phase from questing, like have them all take the exact same path, which is just a massive headache. We shouldn't have to do that to make the game work in terms of a social experience. It's silly. And the bigger issue to me is outside of the role play, it still means that you're not going to be able to, say, for example, you want to go help out a newbie, you want to recruit somebody to your guild. You can't go back and show them the world. Even if you weren't going to help them kill stuff, you can't really help them in any fashion because they'll just be disappearing on you all the time. They'll go over a hill and disappear from sight completely, and vice versa. You guys will not have any interaction with each other, and it's silly. It really, really is silly. And it brings me to what I feel is a bigger issue, a very important issue with Elder Scrolls Online in its current implementation, and that is the idea that with the mega server and the promises from Zenimax that we wouldn't have an issue typical to MMOs in the past where there is a risk of separation between yourself, your peers, friends, guildmates, and more importantly, like-minded players based on, say, something like a server choice. The mega server was supposed to rectify all of this. The problem is that the mega server is still in place, yet its other half, the questionnaire, has been removed. And it essentially means that while all the servers are connected, there's no way to connect people of like minds and like playstyles together. So if you want to play with somebody, say you want to join an RP guild, there's no way to put yourself in a position where you can join an RP guild, and then there's no way for that RP guild to position themselves to interact with other RP guilds. It's again, it brings back to silly and just kind of ridiculous. It's kind of an oversight, a pretty big one. And the problem comes down to, why is it that we cannot join people of like minds in the game? And then it brings me to this idea that, you know what, we're going to be forced to use third-party sites and things like that. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a major misstep and a major blow to the game. Simply because tabbing out to a third-party site should not ever, ever, ever have to occur if the game is implemented correctly. If you have to go off-site from the game, if you have to tab out or use another computer, go onto your smartphone, whatever, to look up something as this important, like to have the social experience part actually work, that's insane. That is part of the actual MMO experience, and if you have to go offsite to do it, then they're doing it wrong. And I know someone's going to say this down in the comments, I'm positive, that, oh, just shut up, use those third-party sites. Well, the problem is I will definitely use those third-party sites because I want to get the most out of my game. The problem is that when it's not in the game and it's not a functioning part of the game as it should be, you hurt the longevity of the game, you hurt the ability for new players to actually get immersed in the game and find like-minded people, and you just make it difficult for the game to function as a working game. If you have to tab out, then obviously all the pieces are not working as they should. And I honestly believe with the questionnaire seemingly gone, I have not been able to find anything to reassure me that it's still in there in some fashion. The only thing I've heard is that it's gone. That's the only thing I can see. There is zero evidence. Zenimax has said nothing of it coming back in the future, anything. I really feel that they just made a massive misstep by having the mega server there without having a backup plan if the questionnaire couldn't be implemented. I really do. They should have just instead done the opposite. They should have committed to an old school style of having servers in a very traditional manner, and then maybe down in the future, like after a couple months or whatever, they figured out the questionnaire thing, then they could just go to full on like massive server merges, put it back to a mega server if that's possible. I mean, WoW is doing something like that with their server mergers, I believe, so it's not too far-fetched of an idea as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not sure why they've committed to the mega server part without having the what I consider the better half, because the mega server without that functionality is just an annoyance. I haven't been able to find any real positives to the mega server when you can't actually pick the people you want to play with. So this brings me to one final thing today, and that's really a question to you guys. Have you and your guildmates and your friends put some thought into and maybe found an avenue in which to combat this oversight? Have you guys found a way to work around the mega server now that the questionnaire is gone? Because when I'm thinking about this and talking with guildmates and stuff, as a former guild leader and a current officer in MMOs and a big game guy who's done MMOs for a long time, it's quite a conundrum, honestly. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I do want to make this clear now that I forget. I think ESO is fun as hell. And outside of the phasing, like in the overworld, the actual PvE stuff, the dungeons, and the combat in general is fun as hell. It really, really is. And I know as an MMO vet, I am going to go to those third-party sites. So for me personally, I'm going to get the most that I can out of ESO. The problem is I want this game to work for everybody. I don't want it to work for just me. For people that are looking to this game at all, obviously people are going to have different tastes and some things aren't going to gel with everyone. But the game needs to be complete. That's really all it comes down to. And that's why it's such a big just slap in the face. And I've said this before with this game. This game has so much potential, and I don't know what it is about the development of this game. One thing, it's amazing, and then the other side, they'll do something just stupid. Like, I don't understand. They're balancing. They're not really taking a logical road down the middle. They're just like, okay, cool feature over here, stupid feature over here, and then we're just seesawing back and forth. I mean, it's really silly. I mean, my hope with this game, honestly, is that after a couple months, they'll implement the questionnaire back in, or even better, I'm hoping that maybe they're just pulling another NDA kind of bullshit move where they're not telling us anything, and then launch comes around and it just happens to be there and works perfectly, even though I can't imagine that happening because the questionnaire is server linked. It's a very important part of the actual server functionality and making the game run properly. So without that part being tested, I just don't see how it's going to be at launch or even remotely close to after launch. Like, it's going to be way down the line, if ever, for that kind of thing. But yeah, anywho, I think that's going to do it for me on this one. I'm rambling a little bit at the end here. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends. Thanks again for watching, and make sure to keep to Nova Pulse Gaming for more ESO goodness, especially if the rumors that are kind of floating around right now about a jam-packed weekend beta are to be believed. I'll definitely be in the game. Maybe I'll see you in there. So thanks again, guys, for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.